Good evening, everybody. Good evening. All right, so we had good music, right? I hear we have good food in the back. Is that right? Yes. All right. This is the end of a wonderful journey, right? So thank you for taking the journey with us. I think this has been one of the most successful Detroiters Speak series that we've collaborated with Semester in Detroit. And I attribute that largely to the importance of the topic, right? I think this is one of the most important topics we have addressed. I think we've scratched the surface. I don't think we pretend to think that we've answered all of these questions. These are incredibly important. But if you think about the arc that we're taking, it began in history, right? So how did we get here? We looked at a number of contemporary issues such as Project Greenlight. We've looked at the issue of surveillance. And the last two sessions have been moving us to thinking about the future, right? So if you remember last week, we were talking about the new abolition movement, how we can start to imagine and then begin to implement a system that we don't have prisons. We don't think about security in prisons as what's creating us in terms of being safe. And we're going to continue that exercise tonight. If you can't imagine a different future, we can't take steps to get there, right? So this notion of imagination, this notion of visioning, this notion of picturing where we want to go is actually a critical process of getting social change, right? And that's where we want to be ending ourselves tonight. But there's visioning and then there's pragmatism, right? So at the same time I want you to be thinking about this larger vision, I also want you to think about what are the steps we can take now, right? And there's that interesting combination between thinking about the vision and then thinking about the steps that we're going to try to get our speakers to talk about. And we'll have a couple of pair shares where you can be talking to your neighbors about these issues in order to internalize the lessons yourselves, right? We've got two short announcements to begin with. We have a wonderful Representative Ray from Michigan Liberation, a new group. She's going to tell you a little bit about their work, and then we'll have a second important announcement that will follow right after that. So, sorry we don't have a bigger cord, Ray.
Hey everybody, I have a pretty small voice, and I know we have a really exciting presentation, so I'll keep this quick. My name is Ray Lanier. I'm the statewide field director for a new organization called Michigan Liberation. Newly founded in August, it is the love project of, 5 years of organizing relationships and us just wanting to take things to the next level. Us being tired of organizers and campaigns only hitting your doors on the, even year, for an election never to be seen or heard from again. Our gem is criminal justice, mass incarceration, and we have a lot of exciting opportunities for you guys to get involved in. In May, we have our Mother's Day bailout, #FreeBlackMamas. If you guys are interested in donating, if you guys are interested in learning about the bail system, how to get someone out, court watching, please, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. And then we also have funner activities. We have one that's launching May 1st called Network. It's for the millennial crowd, people who are invigorated by the issue, people who want to learn how to get involved in a less formalized setting like a classroom. So like I said, my name's Ray Lanier. I have cards in the back, sign-up sheet. Let me know if you're interested.
Thank you. Part of what we're here to do is be able to help each other as community. And when people are in need, we want to be there to help out. And Lauda's going to tell us about an important campaign that she's helping to organize to find Carla.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Detroit. I believe this is the group of Semester in Detroit, right? So yeah, really quickly today, has anyone heard of Carla Valpeos? Because y'all are in Michigan, right? Have y'all heard about Carla Valpeos up there in Ann Arbor? Well, right now there's a petition circulating on change.org.com, and actually we have some friends who are going to be passing out a direct link to a petition we're circulating right now to ensure the U.S. Department is doing everything they can to bring Carla home. She was in Peru in December last year, going to a wedding with a friend, and has been missing since December 12th. She went missing in the Sacred Valley, which is a region around Machu Picchu in Peru. So Carla is a beloved member of the community here in Detroit. She's a local disability justice activist, social worker, restorative justice educator, just loved by the community here. And we've been rallying behind her, trying to support her family and raising funds to cover the expenses of the search, and other ad hoc things. So if you could do two things, maybe not on your phone during this lovely presentation, but at some point today, go to that website and please, please, please sign the petition. Her family's still down there. They're desperate to find their daughter. God is truly a beautiful, amazing human being. You can also check out the Facebook page where we are updating, where we post updates about the campaign regularly, both fundraisers and kind of the status. Currently, it is a criminal investigation. There are very few details I'm able to disclose and even know myself, but I really hope you're able to sign it and feel free to circulate the GoFundMe as well. So thanks.
All right. So how many people are here at the first session? First session, we got some good continuity. I like symmetry, right? So we're going to do a pair share, which means I want you to kind of turn to the person next to you. And I would strongly encourage you, if you know the person next to you, to try to turn the other direction, right? Because part of an exercise like this is to start to get to know and build relationships with new folks. So that's just a suggestion, it's not a requirement. But at the first session, we tried to ground this in trying to think about what are real sources of safety and security. Right? So what are real sources of safety and security? And at the first session, we broke out into small groups, and we had kind of facilitated discussion about that. But you've taken a different journey, right? Or some of you are welcoming in new tonight, some of you are coming in with some of the other sessions. So we want to start this question of our vision about future notions of security with that same question: what are sources of safety and security? And we're going to get you to kind of pair share. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, right, to talk to each other about what are sources of safety and security. We'll have a little bit of reporting out, and then we'll be able to turn the stage over to our wonderful panelists tonight. But I want to get you thinking before we do that. So find a partner, right? Think about what are new sources of security and safety, right? And have a nice conversation for about 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. So start that, and then I'll tell you when you have halftime. You should make sure that both of you have a chance to talk. And then we'll get some of your thoughts out, and then we'll have the panelists. So you're about halfway through. Make sure that the other person gets a chance to speak. right, so try to bring the conversations to a close, but say what you need to say. Great. All right, so if you can think about the conversation you had, and if you can think about describing it in one sentence, think about what that would be. So what's the most important takeaway point? Think about if you could describe that in one sentence, right? This is the most important thing we talked about, and I'm going to ask about 3 people to share out, so we can kind of hear from different people about what the conversations were going. Who wants to share out in terms of what conversation? Is there a hand in the back? And speak loud. And stand up if you could. We're going to...
We talked about how you're more likely to not feel safe and be safe than the inverse.
Okay. Yeah, so what safety is kind of amorphous. There's another sort of notion that says if you have to talk about trust, it's not there, right? So there's a lot of these notions that are very hard to create, and if you actually have to say the word, you know that you're actually facing some difficult challenges. So thank you for that. Who else wants to kind of give a takeaway point from the conversations that you were having? Don't be shy. You too, thank you.
We agree that economic stability brings a level of safety and security to a community.
And thanks, you remember Jaman from our earlier session, so economic security is so important, right? Which also suggests that these issues are so interrelated. You can't think about it without thinking about community, about economy, about everything else. So we can't talk about police or security without thinking about all of these other important sets of issues. 1 or 2 more. Who wants to kind of throw your hand up and throw your hat in the ring? I'm a law professor. I call on people, so don't... Yes, sir.
We said that a source of this is me right here. I can tell you.
Yep. No.
We said that weapons or physical deterrence are a form of security as well.
Okay. There are traditions of self-defense, right? And that raises complicated issues, but real issues. And if the state is not protecting us, as our community is not protecting us, then that's an important set of issues to talk about. But I'll just sort of challenge us, that's probably not the end state we want, right? So just as we got to talk about security means we don't have security, the minute we have to start talking about self-defense, we don't have security. But it's a reality, and I don't want to try to minimize the fact that that is, in a world of insecurity, an important issue to be discussing. I see a hand over here. This will be our last contribution, but thank you.
We talked about how individuals have defined safety differently, so how I define safety might be different from how the other person would define it. And we said that the government should not impose what they feel would make people feel safe. They should actually listen to the community and incorporate everyone's idea of safety instead of just enforcing police and stuff like that. Yeah.
No, I love that idea that the community should be the grounding of safety. And that should have a high participatory element. And if we lose that participatory element, then we really are not creating the safety and community that we're striving for. So thank you. So again, we want you to be thinking. This is a thinking exercise. Your synapses are already firing, which is wonderful. And now we're going to educate you with some wonderful perspectives from folks that are doing this work. We're blessed with 3 people that are doing this work at a deep, deep community level here in Detroit. And we're blessed with another guest who's going to talk about some of the national experience, who's coming to share some of the experience from his work in New York. We're going to start Detroit, all right? And then we'll work our way up to a national perspective. And Negus Vu, who is the president of, if I'm reading my notes correctly, a new organization, right? If I've read the website correctly, the People's Action. And I like to give very short introductions, and I like to invite the speakers to tell you what they want you to know about themselves and their work. So Negus, take it away.
Stand up or sit down? Okay. Hey, peace and love, peace and love. How are y'all? Good? Okay, I'm doing good. I'm wonderful. I enjoyed the food. That was wonderful. Let me introduce myself. My name is Negus Vu. I am a revolutionary. I'm the president for the People's Action. It is it's a new organization that's been around roughly for a year. Many of you that may know me from the previous organization that I was the vice president of, which was New Era Detroit. I'm here because I was invited by Peter, and he's done a very good job of concentrating and trying to put this together the right way. I'm very pleased with the outcome. So what is People's Action? Our mission is to vastly improve the socioeconomic conditions of African Americans and other historically oppressed people across the country. So we focus on socioeconomics. We look at how economics affects the social conditions of African Americans and other historically oppressed people. Just left the neighborhood just now on West Chicago in Livernois, which is reported by the Neighborhood Scout is considered to be the most dangerous neighborhood, and they also considered to be the most dangerous zip code, 48204, in the country. But we are conducting a survey right now, and ironically, everybody that's in the neighborhood feels from 1 to 5, 5 being the safest. A lot of people said they're 5. So it's actually contradictive to what the reports put out. But I want to go back to the actual topic at hand. When we're talking about security and alternatives, when you're looking at police brutality, when you're looking at how things are being policed, well, to be honest with you, looking at it from a Detroit perspective, of course, the police have a bad reputation in the black community, particularly. It's a bad connotation. And when you think about this, the badge, and you think about when you go back until 1619, when they had what is called the slave catcher. The slave catcher had the same exact type of badge that the police also carried as well. So all these things resonates in a negative tone. Then you have to also think about that when you see the police, a lot of times the police that stay in the community are not a reflection of the people that live in the community. So anytime there's a person that does not live in the community, is not from the community, they do not understand the culture, they do not understand certain things the way they are. They're maybe even less empathetic versus somebody who's actually from the community and understand these people and also know how to speak the language, right? Now, the other thing is that what are some alternatives? Well, let's look at poverty. I always said there's a significant correlation between poverty and crime, and there's many studies to prove that. In fact, even if you look at the racial disparity, there's not really a huge racial disparity when you're looking at when white people live in urban poverty and black people live in urban poverty. They both experience crime. In fact, white people experience it even at a higher rate at 5.6 versus African Americans who experience it at 5.2. So what it tells you is not necessarily a race thing when it comes to crime, it's more so of a poverty thing. But at the same time, poverty is disproportionately more affected in black community. So this is where you have the significance of when you're talking about crime. So when we're talking about crime, how do we deal with crime? Police is always, in my opinion, a bad alternative because it does not necessarily heal the process. It doesn't necessarily change the dynamic. If you take one person who is selling illegal drugs and you take them off the corner, the next day there's going to be somebody else to replace the drug dealer, right? If you take a young boy and you take him and you put him in jail for breaking into a house, when he gets out of juvenile, he's going to go back and break into another house. Why? Because there's no resources for that individual. There's no jobs. There's no libraries. I just going into my old neighborhood right now. There's plenty of houses that are blighted. There ain't no libraries. There ain't no recreational centers. There's very few things to do in that neighborhood. Then I go into some of the suburbs. I see recreational centers. I see gyms. I see development. I see businesses. I see grocery stores. I see a lot of development. But in these poor urban communities, I don't see that. So guess what happens when you don't have those kind of resources in your community? You usually go and you actually participate in things that you're more likely not to. Now, I'm not saying just because a person is born in poverty that he's automatically going to do crime, but it has been reported a child that lives in poverty has seven times more likely to commit crimes than a person who's actually has the adequate needs that as far as food, education, and shelter. So anytime you're born in poverty, you're already subject to the means of becoming a statistic based upon your environment and your circumstances. So what does that mean when we're talking about the policing? Well, the police is actually here to enforce. The police are actually here to enforce the law, right? So when we're talking about the law and we're talking about the U.S. Constitution and then we're talking about the state constitution, it doesn't necessarily reflect or it doesn't actually pay attention particularly to those urban communities that are unspoken of, the ones who don't necessarily have a voice. In fact, in poverty, they're also the least likely to vote. They're also the least likely to do policy advocacy. When you go into the urban communities, so the People's Action, we also do political advocacy. I pretty much know most of all the candidates and the political people in the city of Detroit. I had one lady who wanted me to be her campaign manager. And usually when you run for a campaign, you need to know exactly who the voters are. So politicians have all your addresses. If you vote, they have a database so they can pull up your address, when you voted, what your tendencies, etc. Right? She didn't know all that. She just got fresh in the game. She just wanted to become a politician. And she won, so you have the primary and general. She's won the primary race. So I looked, I said, how in the heck did you win the primary and you don't have a database to know who the voters are? I said, how in the heck did you get the word out? Because she didn't send out a mailing list. She said she went to the neighborhoods that looked nice and she knew they voted. And she did not go to the poor ones. That's how she was able to win, just simply by that. So if you go into a poor community that does not necessarily do policy advocacy, they don't vote, they're more susceptible to crime due to the lack of resources, they don't necessarily have a voice in a political atmosphere for them to advocate for the poverty disparities and the economic deprivation that they're faced with. Guess who's their number one enemy besides poverty? It's the police, because the police are there to enforce the law. So if I'm a person that does not have the education, I don't have books in my neighborhood, I don't have the resources, and then here comes a cop coming into the community to enforce the law and not looking at the things that I'm dealing with from a passion, then they become the enemy. So the first thing we need to do when we're talking about the police, and I'm talking about it from a realistic standpoint right now, because I actually meet with the chief police probably I meet with him about 6 times out of the year, and we have conversations and stuff like this. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to have the residency law back. People, there should be nobody, if you're not from that community, you need to be at least grew up close to that community before you police it. You have to understand, I'm gonna be honest with you, if you send me somewhere out, 30 miles out, and it's a neighborhood that I'm not familiar with, I may be a little bit prejudiced because I'm ignorant of what the neighborhood is about. You know what I mean? I'm ignorant to the culture. I don't understand certain things. So it's not because I'm intentionally, malicious or that I dislike somebody, but I don't understand the culture based upon where I'm from. You understand what I'm saying? So if I go to a neighborhood and they do something sporadically that's just common in the neighborhood, I may get scared or I might have a quick reflex based upon my own ignorance. Now, I'm not saying that's a legitimate excuse for anybody that comes in this neighborhood that does these, because anywhere you be, you need to study and understand your terrain. You need to understand your environment. However, we need to have people that lives in the community. That's the first thing. The second thing, I really feel, I told you, I'm a revolutionary. So I really feel like the U.S. Constitution needs to be demolished. It needs to be revamped. I think there needs to be a representative from each ethnicity and each race to create a new constitution, just like when they got rid of the Constitution of, Constitution of Federation? Articles of Confederation. They got rid of that and they came with the U.S. Constitution. They need to come with a new one, because when it was written, African Americans were not considered to be human at the time. Even though we had the 14th and the 13th Amendment, still in all, the others was created under the context that we were not humans. So that needs to change first and foremost. After that is changed, we need to redo the whole policy of how police should be conducted in our community. We've had way too many police brutalities. And in fact, right now, every state does not have to report police killings that are unjustified to the Federal Justice Department. Did you know that? Most states do not report killings if it is not justifiable. They have a thing called the Uniform Crime Report, and those are voluntarily information that is submitted to the Federal Department, Justice Department, And if they don't report, then it's not recorded. So we don't even know the true number of police brutalities and police killings in the neighborhood. So that's another aspect. So these things this is a good conversation. I think we have to have an open mind to it. We have to be understanding. We have to look at it from a very objective standpoint, not necessarily a subjective, even though a lot of it is subjective, but we have to also look at it from an objective, meaning that you have to take your feelings away and look at it for what it is and understand all the variables that are contributing to why we have these problems and issues with security. You also have to look at the lurking variables, meaning you have to look at those that you may not see besides poverty. There's other things as well that's contributing to why things are. So I just wanted to share that. The People's Action, we are in the neighborhood all the time. We're on West Chicago and Illinois. We do block cleanups. We do surveys. We do poverty tax exemption to help save people from losing their homes. We also do women in self-defense because Michigan, I believe, has raised the /1 in human trafficking and child abduction. So we try to teach self-defense to women and children so they can actually get preventative measures to not become a statistic. We also do economic workshops. We do entrepreneur workshop summits to help people if they want to incorporate their business, learn financial literacy. All of these things we try to do to make a change. You can look us up online. It's thepeoplesaction.com, thepeoplesaction.com. I want to thank everybody that came out tonight, and I want to thank Peter for allowing me to come up here and run my mouth. It's been a pleasure. Peace and love.
Thank you, Negus. That's a great opening. And at the end of the session, we're going to talk about how you can put this knowledge into action. And one of the concluding things we're going to do is come back to the panelists and ask them how community can help, right? So I wanted to sort of plant that seeds. It's not enough just to talk about these things. We need to get people engaged, but we need to get them engaged appropriately, right? Because there's ways that people can get inappropriately engaged. We want to be very intentional about the kind of asks that are going to be coming out of this. The Coalition Against Police Brutality has been doing this work for decades. And I also think it's important to honor our elders and people who have spent so much time contributing to our community and giving to our community and leading. So it's a real honor to have Mama Sandra Hines here to be working with us and sharing her knowledge. But I also want to put another elder's name into the room. Ron Scott, who is one of the founders and past presidents of the Coalition Against Police Brutality, is really one of our heroes in Detroit and somebody who has championed this work for so long. And just a personal note, somebody who was generous enough to kind of spend his time and wisdom with me when I was trying to start to figure out this work. And somebody who's carrying out that legacy in a wonderful way is one of our community partners for this series, Sandra Hines.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and was happy to be asked to come and talk to you guys in regards to police brutality. But I want to change from focusing so much on the police and turn it to focusing on us, the individual. We worked on almost every major case of anybody here in Detroit, black, white, or whatever, who fell victim to police violence and brutality. And we fought hard to get those people legal counsel, family counseling, grief counseling, any support we could give to the families of these poor victims that was killed by the police or by law enforcement. But in the process of doing that, we found out in a case of Dennis Crawford, who was killed by the police in front of his family, shot in the back, shot in the head, shot 8 times in front of his family, that how it affects the family is what we also need to focus on. Dennis was over to his girlfriend's house. They got into an argument, and the end of the argument resulted in Dennis being killed because his girlfriend called the police. She called the police because she didn't want to continue to argue and fight with him, and she figured that they would make him go away. Well, they came and they made him go away all right. They shot him 8 times. As a result of that accident, the girlfriend's family and Dennis's family was pitted against one another. We also had to have 2 funerals because they was talking about killing one another. And out of that scenario, we came up with that we had to do something other than just focus on police brutality. We have to focus on us as a community and the role we play in our own violence and the role we play in not banding together against violence. Dennis' family wanted to kill the girlfriend's family. They told us that they was going to do it, and we had to intervene and I literally get in between people in order for them not to kill one another. It made me think about how tragic that was. We came up with the idea for Peace Zones for Life program, which is a conflict mediation program aimed mainly at young adults, youth and young adults, because most of the young people that's getting killed now are youth and young adults. And so we had to look at why that was happening and how we could go from war zones to peace zones. And so it has a lot to do with counseling and different programming that deal directly with you, the individual, and your value system. And we came to try to change how people view their own violence, which leads most of the time to violence against others. So it's not just about focusing on what the police do. We have to focus on what we do to each other and how we're going to change our minds and how we're going to deal with violence from a rational standpoint and from a holistic standpoint, and understand and look and see if we understand what we need to do to love one another. I know that's a trite word and people don't want to hear it, and they say, oh, they go with that wishy-washy stuff. No, love is going to be the key for us to be able to change, because without love, you're not going to be able to change this animal that we got operating in the community now. You can't do it if you don't talk about it and if you don't face the people that you having a problem with. We was able to get those families together, Dennis and his girlfriend's family. After working with them for months, we finally was able to get them, the mother, Dennis's mother, and his girlfriend, to sit down in the room and talk about what had happened in regards to when she called the police. And she was able to share with the mother that she had no idea that Dennis would end up dead at the end of the confrontation. All she wanted him to do was to go away because she was tired of arguing with him. And he would hit her every once in a while and go upside her head. And she would, retaliate by calling the police. So we got to think about how we raising our children, what kind of values that we instill in our homes and in our communities. And that's the missing part that nobody wants to work on. And it's got to be worked on. You got to work on you. We got to work on each other, and we got to come to the realization that our problems are not going to be solved unless we work on them for real. We come to these meetings, it's always a lot of talk. People love to talk and look like they up on high, but it ain't about that. It's about whether or not we are able to come together as human beings and work on racism, another topic nobody really wants to deal with. Most of our problems as black people is racism. It's the fact that nobody value us as individuals, and they take our power because they know we have a lot of power, and they're willing to take and snatch our power from us and then have us thinking that we're the ones that's crazy and at fault. And it's not like that. It's a benefit to white people to look down on black people. It's a privilege. They have privilege rights. And I know you don't want to hear this, but somebody got to say it. I'm sitting in here in a chair now because I've been working on police brutality for 20 years. We founded police brutality in 1996, and we've been going strong ever since. We are the foremost organization that focus on violence against the young people here in Detroit. All of these cases that you've heard of in the last 5 to 6 months, we spoke on them. We had press conferences on them. We evaluate what's going on. We analyze, and then we give solutions to these problems. And we answer questions that people can't seem to get the answer to as it relates to domestic violence, as it relates to police violence. Detroit is a mean city. People walk around with, matter of fact, I was going in my house the other night, and I was getting out of my car, and I'm on a cane, and the guy was coming down the street, and I just sensed, I don't know, something just came over me that he wasn't going to, might be trying to do something. Because he had his hands in his pockets, and when he started getting close to me, he took his hands out of his pockets, and he hesitated before he took another step. And I said, uh-oh. My brain said, uh-oh, wait. And I waited and let him walk on past. When he walked past real slow, and then he turned around and looked back at me, and I said, oh, boy. And so my girlfriend, who had went to open the door for me, to unlock the door, so before I came up, because it took me time to get up to my doorway, she came out right as he was getting ready to look like he was going to make a move, and then he switched around and kept on walking. It's people all over Detroit, you don't know where their mind is at. That's another problem that we got to think about, where people's minds are at. What can you do to help change their mind from violence to peace? Because we have, now the news is a death show. You run home from your job, from school to watch the news. It's like watching some detective story. Somebody is always dead. Somebody is always getting killed. And so we got to look at that as a people, because it's not going to stop from just one organization. It's got to be a bunch of organizations that's going to address this problem. So we're in business, and we want those young people and old people that really want to make a difference and a change, and want to put pressure on law enforcement, and want to put pressure on these politicians that don't fight and work for us. We really have to come together, but we have to come together with a plan of action, because talk is cheap and actions speak louder than words. And so I'm going to turn it over now, because I don't want to take up all the time from my contemporaries, but but you got to just think about that tonight, what you can do to change your mind. And if you have children, what are you going to do to protect your children from the evil that's out here lurking? Thank you.
And we're going to end tonight with gratitude and thank our community partners, but I really do want to thank the Coalition for Police Brutality for working with us in this session and helping make this session as strong as it is. Speaking of community partners, we've got Force Detroit, who's been with us from the beginning as well. So I'm going to turn the mic over with a very short introduction to the director of Force Detroit, Alia Harvey Quinn.
So hey y'all. I feel like, as I've gotten an opportunity to be present at a number of these sessions, and I feel like we've gone on a journey somewhat together. I know I didn't make it to all of them, around unpacking the intersections between like violence and poverty, the history of police brutality, alternatives to mass incarceration. And so hopefully this session brings it on home a little bit. I wanted to ground us in, first of all, an opportunity to think for a short amount of time about, has there been a time in your personal history where you felt oppressed by a system that was bigger than you? So like, raise your hand if that's a yes. Okay. So how did you respond? What were some of the responses? Can y'all just shout out? How did you respond? You became a lawyer. So you became a part of the system?
I'm a defense attorney.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That wasn't a critique. Any more response? How did you all respond? Get over it?
Wake up every day, got a
keep going.
Okay, so just keep going. Any other responses? Yes, sir?
Learn to work the system.
Learn to work the system.
I realize the system is taking advantage of me. Learn to work the system.
Yeah.
Figure out the game was being played and then play the game back.
Yeah, one more. Any other? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I use my legal power through community resources to keep me from being evicted from the Detroit Housing Commission. The worker was misdirected and evicted me, so I use my power against the system.
Yes, honey. It's good to see you, by the way. I can't see you, but I know your voice.
All right, that was my
Yeah, I know who you are. You Sylvester's mama. So I wanna just throw out there that one response to constant oppression, systemic oppression, is violence, right? And so we saw this. I don't know how many of y'all watch old school urban films, right? So there was a scene in Boys in the Hood where Trey, Cuba Gooding Jr., was, he experienced police brutality from an officer that was black. And so that officer was experiencing some self-hate that he shared with Trey about how young men, or Cuba Gooding Jr., about how young men like that embarrass him, right? And then what we saw was Trey's character bottled up that oppression, and he went home and he physically took it out by swinging in the air. You know, now that was one way he got it out of his body, but he could have beat up his brother, or he could have robbed somebody. And so I want to make a few bold claims, and then I'm gonna let this video, these videos that I have, do the actual talking. I want to suggest that we need to invest in alternative schools of thought, right? Because we have, as a people, embraced notions of capitalism, which are inherently violent, right? Notions of capitalism teach us to praise people who inherently harm other people, right? So we praise billionaires, and then billionaires don't pay their fair share. They pay their workers, you know, they choose to uproot their companies and go overseas, many of them, where they can find slave labor, right? So there's this inherent devaluing of people. And I think, you know, I just want to share a few notes, right? Like this idea of otherization that I presented in my last conversation, me versus another person, embracing that mentality and building a community based on that mentality decreases security. But when I create a community that is based on us, right, notions of solidarity and notions of communalism, it creates a sense of safety. And so then I want to also posit that we have spent billions upon billions of dollars in this country financially and systematically and structurally investing in policing systems. I want to just suggest boldly that it's going to take an equal and opposite investment in human capital in order to undo that. And I'm going to let the videos do the rest of the talking.
Separate tab.
Peter, where's Vela? Can we turn him off?
It's in another window.
I'm feeling it.
Gotta minimize the whole window, I think. Like up top left, like the yellow one. Like that, and then go. There we go. Let's turn that off. Pause that. Let's pause that right there in the middle. There we go.
Like a lifestyle change. First thing people say when they hear you from Chicago is they say, how do you survive with all of the shootings and the killings? We can change the culture of the city of Chicago.
Ready Chicago is a violence reduction strategy targeted toward individuals that are perpetrators of gun violence or victims of gun violence in the Chicagoland area.
So it stands for Rapid Employment Development Initiative.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, in addition to workforce skill development and training over a span of 18 months to prepare individuals for economic growth and unsubsidized employment.
But I like to look at Ready as being like a lifestyle change initiative because I think it gives participants an opportunity to really go through the process of change in their own time.
Right now, when we think about violence in Chicago, you had in 2017 about 600 homicides, and in those communities that we're serving, of course, Inglewood and Austin, West Garfield, and North Lawndale, they're top of the list.
These are individuals who, through a social construct perspective, people have given up on, and as they interact with Ready Chicago, you can see the human in them, and you can see how they also have goals and dreams.
How do we provide an opportunity for individuals to start what we call rebooting their behavior?
Cognitive behavior therapy is a therapeutic intervention that's designed to help individuals to change their thinking. You know, it helps individuals to stop and think before they act.
Our purpose is allowing for real hope, real talk, and real love, and part of loving is unconditional, making mistakes and allowing them to try again.
Like they say, keep it 100. You know what I mean? You don't have to be phony, nor do you have to be nobody else. You can just be yourself. And that's what I get out of real talk.
The hope of the individual, believing that, they can change, right? Real hope is one day, you can really find meaningful work and provide for your family, even though you have a criminal record. Real hope is individuals like me who, lived like a decade of criminal behavior and then, was able to just turn my life around.
Inspiration, I mean, every time they come in, I can see a little me. So, I mean, had I had the program, I might have changed my life early. But every individual that comes in that change, then I figure he can change. Then he go home, he making change his household, he making change his kids. It gives me very great hope because I think for everyone that we change some part of the community.
Real love is just like, just coming from the heart and letting people know that you love them. You're worthy of dignity and respect as well as love.
Be bold. Be able to speak truth to power, know your value.
What it looks like as far as outcome, you're going to have more young men who are receiving high school diplomas, more young men who are not out committing acts of violence. They'll be able to take care of themselves and also their families. And so the greater impact is generational.
And I can be able to see longevity in our men and not all of these funerals at the age of 18, 19.
Like I tell the guys all the time, this Ready have gave us all the opportunity to look at our community, to help our community. The more they can do, the better they can do, the better the community can be, and the better we all can be.
The majority of the people that are providing direct service are individuals who have life experience, individuals who either come from these communities, people of color, people who have gone through the justice system, and they have an opportunity to give back. People who were part of the problem at some point are now part of the solution.
We are really developing change agents. Many of the guys in Ready Chicago, they're leaders. They're leaders in their communities. So once they start changing, then we'll see the domino effect throughout the rest of the community and the city.
Real talk, real hope, real love, be bold.
We are ready.
So there's just one more.
Now for our What in the World segment, here's a strange idea for you. What if cities paid likely criminals not to commit crimes? Think it sounds crazy? Well, Washington, D.C. may start doing just that. After murders in the nation's capital went up 54% last year, the City Council recently voted for a crime bill that includes a provision to give money to those who are most likely to commit acts of violence.
And all those in favor of the amendment nature for substitute say aye. Aye. Opposed?
200 people per year could receive payments in conjunction with mentorship and therapy. Criticism of the proposal has been withering, as you might imagine, and the bill is not certain to go through. But here's the really crazy part. Another city has run a similar program for several years, paying out tens of thousands of dollars, and it appears to be working. In 2007, the Bay Area city of Richmond, California, was the 9th most dangerous city in the United States. Things were so bad, the city officials thought about asking the National Guard to be sent in. Instead, they created the Office of Neighborhood Safety, a new department separate from law enforcement that would focus on reaching out to the community to fight gun violence. Devone Bogan, the head of the program, says he discovered a game-changing data point a few years in. About 70% of the gun crimes in the city were caused by only 28 people in 2009. If you could reach those 28 individuals, Bogan thought, maybe you could bring down the crime rate. So Bogan and his team spent weeks trying to find those young men, gathering almost 24 of them for an unlikely meeting at City Hall, he says. They were offered a deal to join an intensive, multifaceted program of mentoring and therapy known as the Peacemaker Fellowship. If they stayed with it for 6 months, they could earn as much as $1,000 per month over the 9 months that followed. All of them accepted the deal. And the results since then, Bogan says, have been remarkable. Of the 68 who have participated in the program since 2010, 79% have not been suspected of a gun crime. Remember, these are the worst of the worst in Richmond. What's more, since Bogan's department was created, homicides have plummeted from 2007 to 2014. Firearm assaults also dropped dramatically during that period. But what about the cost of doling out thousands of dollars to would-be criminals? Bogan argues that his program is chump change compared to the current price tag for gun violence. In 2015, Mother Jones published a fascinating investigation breaking down the costs of American shootings, from hospitalizations to legal fees to imprisonment. Each gun homicide costs taxpayers almost $400,000 on average. The total cost of gun violence, including the financial impact on the victims, came to over $229 billion per year in 2012, more expensive than obesity and just a bit less than federal Medicaid spending. Bogan's program spends on average $70,000 every year on the stipends for all of its participants, on average, he says. But what about the moral argument? Should we really be paying people to be virtuous? Bogan argues that if anyone needs the extra help, it's the individuals in his program. They are forgotten members of society with hardly any support from parents, schools, or their communities. Besides, let's face it, our current approach to crime isn't really working. Maybe we need some innovative ideas to save taxpayer money and American lives.
Can't believe it.
That we just hit the mother load of soft serve ice cream?
No, I can't believe how easy it was to save hundreds of dollars on my car insurance with Geico.
We struck spring!
Yeah, so I'm just going to end my presentation by saying that Force Detroit has developed a coalition of folks that are working towards developing a strategy for an innovative community-led solution like this to work parallel ceasefire. We're in the process of organizing that. Negus Vu, Force Detroit, and several other key organizations. Yes, sir. No. Yes, sir. There's like a blooper with him every week, y'all. Like it's on a regular basis. I left some lit in the back. Please check out the lit. You could go to our website at forestdetroit.org. In Detroit, the numbers are staggering. So for every gun homicide, it costs the city about $1.6 million of public resources between the hospital stay, crime scene cleanup, the cost to pay detectives and whatnot. $1.6 million. If the folks don't die, it's only $1.1 million. So while there has been some success with our ceasefire programming, it's not enough to create a meaningful, like, safe environment for our communities, right? And so we have been developing this advocacy plan with the thought that there have been activists in the community for years that have been developing effective safety programming but have not been allocated the resources or the structural support that nonprofits are due when they do this type of meaningful work, right? Coalitions like yours, right? We've been trying to reach out to y'all for a while and haven't been able to. Please sign up. Please check out our lit, forcedetroit.org. Thank you for your time. You can always reach out to me.
I want to say something about creating humane spaces, and I want to thank Alia, amongst other things, by bringing her children here. Because if we're not creating spaces where we're learning that are safe for children and are welcoming to children, we're not doing our job. So I love seeing them here, and I just want to give a shout out to the wonderful kids that are help keeping us sane. There's a lot that's happening in Detroit. There's a lot, as we saw in those videos, that are happening nationally that we can learn from. Fortuitously, we're very blessed to have Alex Vitale, who's a professor of sociology at Brooklyn College here in Detroit for other reasons, and he agreed to stop by and spend some time with us. Amongst other accomplishments, he's just written a book called The End of Policing, and he'll share a little bit about himself, a little bit about the book, and a little bit about the experiences that he's seen across the country.
Thank you, thank you. Very grateful to be here and thankful for the invitation. And I see a couple of copies of the book here in the room, which is very gratifying, of course. I've spent well, first of all, a little bit about myself. I've been an academic for the last 20 years working on policing and community development issues, but before that I was an organizer for a number of years. So I've tried to walk that line between research and advocacy, and in New York I run a center called the Policing and Social Justice Project that does a lot of work fighting back against gang databases, gang conspiracy cases, and talking about exactly the kind of community-based anti-violence efforts that are needed to break the cycle of violence. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about a kind of national perspective. For the last couple of years, I've been crisscrossing the United States, about 25 cities a year, speaking in meetings like this, working with groups like the Advancement Project, ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and a lot of smaller local community-based groups like we have here tonight. And in doing this work, what I see is a profound competition between two different visions of what safety could be. The dominant vision that's out there that drives a lot of the discourse about the problems with policing and the criminal justice system is what many of us call a procedural justice approach. And this is the idea that the problem with policing is that the police are biased, unprofessional, discourteous, and brutal, and sometimes racist. But the solution to that is a set of procedural reforms to make policing more professional, more closely tied to the law, less biased in their behavior. And this gets expressed as a series of recommendations for improvements of training and community policing. And on the surface, this sounds pretty appealing. We're kind of tired of really bad policing. The problem is that a totally lawful, well-trained, unbiased, legal, low-level drug arrest is still going to ruin some young person's life for no damn good reason. It does not matter how procedurally proper that arrest is, it is still fundamentally unjust. We've had this war on drugs for almost 50 years. Drugs are cheaper, easier to get, more potent than they've ever been. We got overdoses through the roof. Any young person in our country can get any kind of drugs they want anytime they want them. We got nothing to show for this war on drugs except literally millions of people sent to prison. Narcotics units do not need anti-bias training. We need to end the war on drugs. But what we hear is not that. What we hear from the Obama Justice Department and the people who run the elite research institutions is, well, we need to give the police implicit bias training. That's one of my favorites. How many people have heard of implicit bias training? I'm sure they do some of that here in Detroit. I didn't get a chance to look that up before I got here. Implicit bias training is based on this idea, well, we all have unconscious stereotypes that maybe shape our behavior in some way, but it's unconscious, it's unintentional, and if we just remind police that racism is a problem in the U.S. and ask them could they just please shoot fewer black people, that this would be a really big improvement, and thank you very much. Well, the problem with that, there are many problems with that. First of all, the research is really problematic. But even if the research behind this is robust, we got a lot of explicit racism in policing. It's not just unconscious and implicit. You just had a whole bunch of officers fired here in Detroit for explicit racism. When we look for racism in policing, we find it. The emails, the chat boards, the official statements of police union leaders in many parts of the country. That's not implicit bias, that's explicit bias. And no amount of, could you please be nice to black people, is going to fix that. But it's also, I think, a mistake to think that the problems of race in policing can be reduced to individual officer discretionary decision making. Because the fact is that the racism is built into the mission of policing. It's built into the mission. The police say, well, we just go where the crime is. How can that be racist? We just go and we make arrests where the crime is. We just go where the 911 calls are. Now, that's not entirely true. There's a lot of discretionary policing that goes on, especially around the drug war. They're not running buy and bust operations in the high-rise office buildings down the street here, and I can guarantee you they are filled with drugs. But even if they just went where the crime was, there's a reason why there are more calls for service in these places. Because there are a lot of communities in this country that got a lot of problems. But those problems are the result of a long legacy and the current active production of racism and economic inequality. It's not accidental. It's not because of individual or group moral failure. It's not because there's some deficiency in these folks. They live in places that have been systematically discriminated against, and they've got a lot of problems as a result. They got a lot of anger. They got a lot of trauma that they're trying to work through, and they're not getting any help. So that when we say to the community, you've got a problem, the solution is we're going to send more police to solve that problem for you, that reproduces racial inequality, no matter how procedurally fair it's done. Because the whole idea that the solution to our problems comes in the form of an armed police officer is part of the problem. And this is my beef with community policing. Well, who could be against community policing? I hear your chief is in love with community policing. Don't we want the police to know us, to treat us with respect, to have some idea who the good people are and who the bad people are in the community, to work with the community to identify problems and to come up with solutions? That sounds good, but first of all, the idea of community for the police is something that they create. They choose the community. They decide who represents the community. There are no homeless people in those community meetings. There are no formerly incarcerated people in those community meetings. There are no young people in those community people. There are no undocumented people in those community meetings. You know the kind of folks who populate those meetings. And if any of those people on that list do show up, are they made to feel welcome? Do they have a real role in shaping the priority? No. But even if they did, the whole idea of community policing is that the community brings its problems to the police to solve. But what tools do the police have to solve our community problems? They got guns and handcuffs and ticket books and threats and coercion. Those are not the solutions that we need for our community problems. Do they have affordable housing, eviction protection, drug treatment on demand, quality mental health services? They don't have any of that stuff. They got threats and abuse, coercion and punishment. So this idea that if we could just make the police more professional and nicer to us, that that's somehow going to fix our problems is completely misguided. And we've got to call that out. Because all that does is build up the idea that police are the solution to all our problems. But that's not real safety. There's another vision of safety that's out there. And we heard a lot of elements of it here tonight. It's very exciting as I travel around the country to see how much of this work is really going on, but it's not being talked about in these elite circles where policy is being made. So I'm going to give you a few examples that I've come across the country of people trying to do this. And all of it is driven by a vision that says the way we change this is to build individuals and communities up instead of tearing them down. So the first example is from Ithaca, New York, in upstate New York. Turns out they have a drug problem there, like every community in America right now. But the mayor there understood that a policing-led strategy is not the solution. It's just going to mean more incarceration, more cycling people through the criminal justice system at more cost and no good impact. So he said, let's try something totally different. Let's put everything on the table as a possibility. And let's bring in some experts. Some people who do harm reduction, who do drug treatment. Let's bring in some people who've been drug involved, who've been incarcerated. And let's kind of come up with a blueprint. So they laid out some principles and they put together some ideas, but they didn't stop there. They took it to the community. They held town hall meetings, they did focus groups to try to make sure that these ideas would work in the community, that there would be support for them. Well, it's called the Ithaca Plan, and you can look it up, and there are no police in it. There's drug treatment on demand, safe injection facilities, needle exchange programs, other kinds of harm reduction initiatives, peer-to-peer education efforts, and targeted economic development efforts to try to target those places where drug dealing and drug using have produced the most harms for the community. That's what public safety looks like, not charging the dealer with homicide when someone has an overdose, which is the main response we've gotten to the opioid crisis. We've gotten a lot of talk a lot of talk about, well, these kids need help and we need more rehabilitation. But if you look, the arrests are unchanged. The incarcerations are still happening. The penalties are being made harsher. My next example is from New York. I'm sure some of you have heard about the efforts there to close Rikers Island, the city jail complex. Very exciting. I think I'm wearing my Close Rikers t-shirt under this. I just remembered. And they've done a tremendous job of pointing out the harms that Rikers Island produces, the brutality, the violence, the massive recidivism rates, the huge costs that are involved in running it. But that alone, they understood, is not going to be enough to get us over the finish line. Because the reality is, there are still communities where people feel the need to call the police because there are problems that are not otherwise being addressed. So part 2 of their campaign is the Build Communities part. And they spent a number of months convening work groups made up of community-based organizations, academic experts, researchers, and people who've been affected by these systems, and issued a Build Communities report with sections on housing and healthcare and education and youth services that lays out what we could do with the money we spend on Rikers Island to actually help communities be safer. And we've got to have both parts of that equation. We've got to divest from police and jails and prisons and invest in communities. It's not enough to just de-police. It's not enough to just close down a facility because communities are hurting. They need help. We've got to have both of these parts. So the last example I'll give you is from Salinas, California. It's an agricultural community in the Central Valley of California. I was able to spend a few days out there last month meeting with them. They have undertaken a comprehensive community organizing strategy under the label of Build Healthy Communities, Salinas. And they've put together a vision of what healthy communities in Salinas would look like, with adequate housing, with basic health care, with community-based mental health services, with real drug treatment, with culturally appropriate trauma services, stronger schools, restorative justice programs. And now, instead of just putting it out there as a vision, they're organizing. But they're not just organizing in a general way, they're doing it in a targeted way. They've said, we got city council members in Salinas who claim to be our friends, but every time we turn around, they want to open up another youth facility, a youth detention facility. They want to hire more police. They want to put police in the schools. These are not our friends. And the way we're going to get rid of them is that we're going to take this package of ideas in a specific council district and start doing the organizing, going door to door, holding town hall meetings, doing house meetings, saying, why can't we have drug treatment on demand in our community? Why can't we have adequate mental health facilities? Why can't we have jobs for our young people? And when politicians hear those demands and say, oh, we can't afford it, we can't do it, we have a message that is, what about that new jail wing you just paid for? What about those school police you just tried to put in the school? There is money, you're just spending it on the wrong thing. And they had a big victory. About 6 weeks ago, the city tried to put a whole bunch of police in the elementary schools. Using federal money, they said, oh, we got this federal money, it's free. So of course, why wouldn't we want to do this? But because the community had been organizing, they saw right through that. For one thing, that money runs out, and then they got to take it out of the city budget, so it's never really free. But even if it were free, that's not how we want to produce safety in our schools. And you're like, elementary schools, why elementary schools? Well, that's where school policing always begins. The origin of school policing in the 1950s was about responding to juvenile crime among teenagers by putting police in elementary schools, not to make the schools safer, but to win the kids over to the idea that police are their friends and that what's needed is more respect for authority in the guise of the police officer. It's about an ideology of authoritarianism that says the solution to every problem comes in the form of a police officer. And this is exactly what we have to call bullshit on. Thank you.
No, it's great when people come and share their expertise, so I really appreciate that. You saw how much wisdom is there. There's a couple of books here, but if you don't get it tonight, The End of Policing is going to teach you a lot more about what's happening around the country, as well as concrete ideas of what we could do about it. Two things that I was taking away just as the sort of last examples in your remarks. One is that so much of this is controlled by our belief systems. Right? Or I would say dominant belief system. I wouldn't say our belief systems necessarily, but by the dominant belief system. And if we're not attacking the dominant belief system, we're not going to make any progress. The second is that it seems like the most effective strategies are community strategies, right? And so really redirecting our efforts, thinking hard about how we engage community. And this is the hard work of organizing. It's education, it's knocking on doors, it's giving people alternatives, but that's the hard work that all these organizations up here are doing, and we're going to turn back to them before we end tonight and ask them what we can do to help them, right? So we're going to talk about the community, we're going to get concrete sort of information from these organizations about how we can provide assistance. I want to talk about that idea of belief systems just for a minute, though. If you remember in one of the earlier sessions, I talked about how fish have incredibly underdeveloped theories of water, right? Because fish are surrounded by water, right? We are surrounded by a police state, right? In the same way that fish are surrounded by the water. And that means when you're surrounded, you're immersed in that kind of environment, it really is hard just to imagine anything that's not the same. Right? And I was listening to a book on abolition of slavery, and one of the challenges the author was saying, well, how could somebody, right, think about yourself in 1819, right, 200 years into the existence of this awful oppressive institution, but an institution that defines your society. So what did it take for people to start imagining a different future? Right? We're in a very much a similar situation. Where does it take for us to imagine new sources of security, to imagine visions of what provides safety that doesn't have that image of the police officer standing in front of an elementary school system saying, I'm here to help you, right? So anyway, think about the belief systems. What I want you to do, we're sort of landing this plane after 8 sessions, and we've had an opportunity to have a whole lot of learning, but learning is not enough, right? The whole idea here is how do we turn this knowledge into action? So we're going to do one more pair share, right? And then we're going to turn a question back to our panelists about how they can help. But the pair share is saying, with all of this learning that we've done, how can you put the knowledge that you have gained through these sessions into practice? Right? So how do you put this knowledge that you've gained into practice, realizing that vision has to also have pragmatism, right? Realizing that change happens at a micro level of interpersonal relationships as well as a macro level, realizing that there's a very deep personal component of this as well as a systemic component of this, right? So kind of in your own mind now, kind of reflect, how are you going to take this knowledge, how are you going to turn this into practice? How are you going to take this knowledge, how are you going to turn it into practice? And find somebody, right, sort of turn, right, find somebody hopefully that you haven't spoken to before or somebody who's not your best friend, and we're going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to sort of talk about how you can take this knowledge and turn it into practice in order to create a safer society. So find your friend, right? I'll give you about a halfway warning, but talk about that, and then we'll have a quick reporting out for people's ideas, and then we're going to turn the question to the panelists about how we can help you. You're about halfway through, so let's make sure that everybody has a chance to talk. Halfway through. All right, kind of get the planes landing. Figure out how you want to bring this conversation to a close. Great. And I want to do the same thing that we did before. And that's for you to all kind of focus for a minute and to think in your own mind all these good conversations. So if we get people to kind of bring their conversations to a close for a minute. Thank you. And I want you to still think, but I want the thinking to happen in your head and not through your lips. All right. So think for a minute. Kind of reflect upon the pair share that you just had and distill that in your own mind to the most important takeaway point. Right? So you've all had some very intense, interesting, pair shares conversations. Think about for yourself what was the most important takeaway point that you got from that conversation. Right? And I'm going to ask again if we can get kind of 2, 3, 4 folks to be willing to volunteer and share with us that one takeaway point from that conversation, so we can all benefit from that. And then we're going to be able to turn it back and ask that question how these wonderful leaders can tell us how we can help them. But what's some takeaway points you had about how you can turn this knowledge into practice? I'm going to hold you on hold because I want to see if we can get some different voices. But if we don't get different voices, then we can get double dippers. Who wants to share kind of an important takeaway point? Some new voices. Yes, sir. Yeah. So the point here is that the oppression is often invisible, right? And is not getting the attention, and the violence on one side is ignored. And yet all of these other stories and focus in the media, this narrative is reinforcing this dominant vision that security is only coming from police. Is Baba Jaman Jordan still in the house? All right. So he'd love that. He's saying that you need the history, right? Remember that Jaman Jordan was our historian here. We need to lift those messages up, right? We need to know our own histories, and that's going to take research because we're not learning that in our high school courses or our college curriculum. And then we got to share that history with others. So there's a role that each of us can play in terms of being teachers. So I really love that comment. 2 or 3 other people that want to share quick take-home points of what you learned or sort of benefited from that conversation. Yes, sir.
Something we talked about is just keep talking about it because a lot of good things for us have been brought up in this box that like maybe my life just hasn't taught me, but someone else's life experiences have. So just don't stop talking about it, informing people that aren't sitting here with us today.
Yeah, you need diverse groups to have these conversations, All right? You can talk in the suburbs, you're not going to learn anything because you're not going to have that knowledge. So you really do need to continue these conversations and make sure you're building in the diversity into that. One more sort of comment. Yes, sir. Your take-home point. Yeah.
Apparently, the blacks and Hispanics are in jail, and it's a big business. And apparently, I work at Myers. They said the police force is being more like more Asian. So that's the fact. And downtown, Conrad said it's becoming white town. The majority of the police is downtown. The reality is, I'm not gonna allow to take over my city. You know what I'm saying? The suburbs, what's gonna happen? Suburbs, where everybody's black folks, other people of color, on the Southfield, Oak Park, there's going to be so-called come together. That's why you're doing all this renovation in the city, especially downtown. And I spoke before, why some of these things don't speak. The reality is, you know, y'all know this government, this city is made for y'all. You know what I'm saying? 13th Amendment, you know what I'm saying? Basically saying, serve you in jail, you're a slave.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, that's somebody else too.
Great.
You hear that taking notes? Y'all here for a reason. And y'all ain't saying anything. I always see the expression on y'all face. And y'all see me come here talking all the time. And y'all say something. Why are you here? Just for class? Are you looking learning today? What are you taking home with you?
No, those are all great questions. And one thing I want to take away from what you're saying, you've got to put this in a position of a power analysis, right? Who's holding the levels of power? Where is the money flowing? And unless you're diverting that ultimately, and that's going to take grassroots political action because you got to build the power, we're not going to get that. I've got to kind of put down the pair share at this point because we have about 2 other things so we can end on time and get a good carry out of this program and a good end of the session. I want to ask our panelists if they could share kind of just 2 minutes on ways in which community can be helping you in your work. And we'll go through the same order in which we had the panelists present. So, Negus.
Peace and love. 2 ways. The primary way, of course, is always bodies. Okay? Coming out and volunteering, we always have something going on. Again, you can go to our website, The People's Action. Again, that's thepeoplesaction.com. Or you can email us at info@peoplesaction.com. I want to say it's the 2nd or 3rd week of May. We're going to be doing block cleanups, possibly boarding houses, cutting grass. We do this to build up the morale in the community. We want to help. We don't just want to come to the community just to try to be Superman or something like that. But what we try to do is engage the community to come on out and actually participate in it. Because you can tell the morale and the tone of the neighborhood, you can tell by how clean it is, right? So if the neighborhood looks good, it's clean, it's not about whether or not it's impoverished. It's more so about how people view the neighborhood. So we want to change the context and how people view the neighborhood. If you look at this is a young audience, so I know some of y'all are aware of Nipsey Hussle, the rapper who just passed away, right? One of the things that was significant about him is that he was encouraging people to stay in the community, don't leave. And too much in the African community, we always want to leave and go out and leave the neighborhood because we feel it's a better place. But no, you don't run away from the neighborhood, you revitalize it and build it up. That's the concept of Adopt a Block. It's a beautiful thing. Come out. We also going to be doing entrepreneur summits. We also having a thing called the All Black City Tour. That's when we're going across all the different black businesses in the city of Detroit. African Americans only make up only 2% of the of the businesses in the city of Detroit, but yet it's an 80% black city. So what we're trying to do is encouraging more people to be aware of some of the black businesses and give them an up hand as well. So again, just reach out. And the other way, you can also make a donation. We are a grassroots organization. We always can use the expenses, and you'll see where it's being spent right in the community. Peace and love. Whoa. Oh, the Cash App is $, the People's Action. Okay, $, the People's Action. Thank you.
What we would like to see happen with the coalition, Detroit Coalition Against Police Brutality, is that the young people come and work with us and be the ones that's leading this whole fight since you are mostly the ones that are affected by violence, whether it be domestic violence, police violence, community violence, all of it has to be addressed. And so we want to see you guys work with us in our Peace Zones for Life program, moving war zones to peace zones is our motto. And so if you're interested in being a part of the coalition, you can meet me after the meeting and I'll get the information to you. Thank you.
So, you've got folks here doing the work. These folks, and I'm actually very interested maybe to hear a little bit more at some point about what Michigan Liberation is doing. I've seen a little of the literature. It looks like the kind of stuff that a lot of folks are doing around the country that's totally necessary. Up here I've posted a website that's a resource page for this kind of vision of building communities and not police power. And it has subsections on school policing and youth violence. It's still a work in progress, but anyway, it's, now I messed it up. It's policingandjustice.org/building-communities. And it's just a resource page of work like this happening all across the country. And so wherever you end up, there are folks doing this work that you can plug into.
As for me, there are two things. Please sign up to volunteer. You can go to forcedetroit.org. But then many of us are able to have conversations in this room that we would be uncomfortable with having at home. We know that there's a rise in division amongst races, and there's a rise in right-wing racism in this country. So for those of you who don't feel comfortable having this conversation at home, please go have this conversation at home. I cannot tell you how tired I am. I can't tell you how tired I am of being in spaces with white allies that want to work in our community, that first of all don't understand our community enough to do the work, and second of all don't want to work with their community, which holds a lot of power, to fight for just policy in these areas. So if you really care about the conversations that we have, I challenge you to have a difficult conversation in your own home environment, and to maybe start that work to challenge some conservative thought in your own neighborhood, your own organization, your own book club, your own organization to do that work. Now, if you want support with that, honey, call me, and I will help you build that up.
No. A big hand of applause for our panelists. I want to kind of pick up on that last comment. How many people here are part of the enrolled students? So enrolled students in the class, so a good number. How many people are from Wayne State? Good shout out to my friends from Wayne State. We love you. How many people from the University of Michigan? All right, good shout out for our UM folks. Not enough work is done in our community, and I say ours is the white community. And we want to go off and do good work elsewhere, which is not a bad idea. All right, we often do it in bad ways, so it takes a lot of intentionality. But if we really want to end racism in this country, it's got to be done by white people in white communities. All right, and just kind of think about that. And think about those conversations that take place in your families. Think about those conversations that take place in your classrooms. All right, think about those conversations that take place, in the corridor at the bus stop. Right? If we're not willing to take the fight there, right, both on a level of challenging anti-blackness, but also as a level of taking these ideas that you're getting in a class like this and educating your peers as to what are the problems with the security state. What are the flawed assumptions that are based in the thought that jails are going to be able to solve a problem, right? So just plant those seeds, right? The lessons can't just stay in Detroit. The lessons have to get out in the suburbs. And it has to be led not by people of color. It's got to be led for white people challenging white racism. So there's an important lesson at that point. The other thing I would say, and this is sort of in this notion of what we can do in community, is to bring into the room what we heard last week, right? We heard about a wonderful fight against Rikers Island, right? If we remember from last week, there is a contemporary fight that's happening right now about trying to get a new mega jail in Detroit, right? So another sort of effort of saying, what can we do as a community? What can people in this room help assist to is also fighting that new jail. So keep that in mind. I always like to end in gratitude, right? So think about this has been 8 sessions together, right? And I really appreciate you taking the journey with us. And I want to give a shout out to our community partners. How many people are part of our community friends here? All right, just members of the community. To me, you are what makes this program special, right? This is supposed to be an open community classroom. This is supposed to be an effort to trigger conversations that are relevant to Detroit, right? Detroiters speak to your needs, right? And to do so in a way that gets intergenerational communication between people so our young folks can learn from our elders, right? And that kind of intergenerational communication is so important. So a big thanks to all of you. I want to say specifically thank you to our community partners that have been with us. So we've had Force Detroit as our community partner. We've had the Coalition Against Police Brutality as one of our important community partners. If you're remembering from last week, we had the Detroit Justice Center, and we have representatives here as one of our community partners. We've had BYP 100 doing our surveillance system, and Paige Watkins out here last time. They have helped make this program, right? And so I really just want to give a big shout out and appreciation for how much you've contributed to make this program a success. And I would end by just sort of reminding us and extending thanks to our partners that are part of the Detroiters Speak series. So our University of Michigan semester in Detroit, we've got Craig Register and Marion Berger, right? Big thanks. The wonderful person who's brought all the Wayne State undergraduates here, David Goldberg from the Wayne State Department of African American Studies. We've got Peter Blackmer here, who's from the Detroit Equity Action Lab, as part of the David J. Key Center for Civil Rights. So one last vision, right? So close your eyes, right? This is our last moments together. Think about this notion of whose safety, right? Whose safety is all of these things improving? Who is it not improving, right? Think about the themes that we've been able to blend together to think about policing, not just the way that we would normally think about it, although those images are equally important. Think about the way that we've been policing bodies, and that's sort of been an important focus tonight, and how much of our traditional police is focusing on policing bodies, right? But it's also policing boundaries, right? It's saying who can go where, and in Detroit, those boundaries are shifting in important ways in trying to deny space to a majority black city to important parts of Detroit's access, right? So we're policing the bodies, we're policing the boundaries, right? But none of that's gonna work if we're not also policing the minds. So we are controlling our way of thinking, and until we break out of the controlling our way of thinking, we're not gonna be able to create safety for all. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for having a great session, and get home safely.